Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Starting over again. Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, 2026. Windows decided to update, and this is really the best argument so far for me to get around to actually building my new computer and moving over to bad side Linux. And fairly often when Windows updates, it messes up OBS as far as just not being able to remember what physical device the microphone is connected to. And I had noticed that and fixed it for the audio out, but I hadn't fixed it for the audio in. Thus the long period at the beginning of the stream of silence. Unfortunately, I've heard enough rumors to make me suspect that you kind of run into the same problem on a lot of Linuxes too, and that has more to do with just Wayland's until very, very recent versions of Wayland not having security permissions to let devices be remembered, which they're working on that. And I guess that is something to say for Linux, at least, is that they're working on it and they're moving in the direction of improving things, whereas a Windows update is nowadays as likely to break your computer as it is to noticeably fix anything. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Let's scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart. Overall, I've been mostly playing Oracle of Ages, Game Boy Zelda game, and certainly there is some real problems with that Zelda game in that usually in a Zelda game you can skip a rhythm game or a mini game, and in Oracle of Ages there's just no way to get to the ending unless you do the go on dance sequence in the past and present a couple of times. You don't get the boomerang unless you do a side mini game that's a baseball equivalent, and the timing on them all seem awfully terrible. Like, there's just no way I would have been able to beat any of it if I wasn't cheating like crazy, making save states and reloading save states. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to beat most of the dungeons in the second third of the game if I wasn't making save states. And it's not really like I'm doing anything wrong. It's just either on the Steam Deck emulation things are running faster than they should, which might be the case. But it really shouldn't be, because that would be inaccurate emulation at that point. You can set the settings for things to run faster, but it's not recommended. No, I suspect they just made the game basically impossible. Certainly would explain why you don't see people singing the praises or even talking about Oracle of Ages. It is extremely questionable whether you would ever have a remake of those games that was just like a remaster of them. I guess maybe a full remake of the concept might work, but also in Oracle of Ages you were just playing as a Link that a talking tree falls in love with very early in the game, so there's some weirdness in that, and you're not in Hyrule in the game at all, which maybe there is a theme certainly to think about there, in that a lot of the mobile Zelda games are not even claiming to be in Hyrule. Link's Awakening, certainly same thing. It definitely goes to show that when they were making those early Zelda games, they definitely were thinking that it was the same land and that the same land would have to look the same, whereas now nobody is really going to try and compare the Hyrule of Breath of the Wild to the Hyrule of Ocarina of Time to the Hyrule of the original Zelda game, which obviously would be drastically different. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has almost fallen completely off this list. Not super surprising, it's been around for a very long time and you never really did anything special to grow its audience or do anything different or even really adjust a unique problem that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has in that there are just way too many cards. Speaking of cards, there is also the case of, while I have almost all of the basic Pokemon TCG pocket cards, I'm actually missing hundreds, if not a couple thousand, of the premium cover art versions. Yeah, you just never would get all of those without paying a lot of money for them. And they don't play any differently, they just look differently, which may not even be a good thing, because if your card isn't recognizable, then it just gets harder to be able to play your deck. Although having one card that does the same thing with one kind of art and another card that does the same thing with a different kind of art is a way you could potentially do a little bit more of a card counting, but wouldn't really matter that much in Pokemon because you just don't have that much return to deck cards or draw extra cards in a Pokemon game anyways. In Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! That kind of strategy might make more sense if you have a very special deck to use that kind of strategy. I have been doing little bits of work on the news. I also realized that there was a bug in the follow list cleanup. When the follow list page doesn't load originally until I fixed this bug, it was assuming that there were just no links. And then it was resetting the pointer to where to start the next time to 0. Which means every single time that the page failed to load, it was resetting back to the very end, which really means 2 or 3 times it did that. So I have corrected it to say, hey, if you don't get any links at all, don't reset the pointer, just assume that the page failed to load. Because on the follow list, if the page fails to load, it's almost certainly because of a timeout on the SQL database on the back end, and the page will load the next time. Although sometimes it takes an hour or two for them to restore from backup or for it to restart. I imagine most of this is very, very automated and not being even monitored that much by people. I watched Hail Mary as a movie. It's a fine movie, but not really a great movie. I was thinking it would have been closer to Interstellar, or just more of an epic experience. And I just felt like the flashbacks and the characterizations were telling a very different story than what I was expecting, as far as the relationship of the main protagonist and his alien friend. And I would say, as I thought about it a little bit more, the problem overall is that he doesn't really run into too many challenges, where it would be a challenge and then he overcome that challenge and then there's a new challenge after a little bit of celebration that's even bigger. He is definitely the main protagonist. It's just like supposed to be, I almost felt like calling it rednecks in space, but it's not a redneck in any means. He's just an everyday man. He's a teacher. He's just like a likable guy that shouldn't have been in space but somehow manages to do great things in space. And it definitely feels like that's not really your typical hero or hero's journey, particularly in a spoiler that I won't spoil since the movie is relatively new, in that if you really were to look at the hero's journey concept, he didn't heed the call to heroism, the call to action. Um, and so, yeah, at least not until way, way late in the movie. It might have been closer to a movie that would be like E.T. than what I was thinking it was going to be. But yeah, it's a fine movie worth watching once. I finished watching The 10th Kingdom and that miniseries. I enjoyed it pretty well. I'm fairly certain, because it has an intro that shows the Twin Towers being magically turned into nothing, and that it came out the year before 2001 9/11 attacks, that it got buried. And then 10 years after it came out, Once Upon a Time did this similar concept, but so much had changed by that point. Like, Once Upon a Time, 10 years later, is a gritty soap opera type show, drama, that probably didn't have any good writers after the major writers' strike. And yeah, maybe there were some good seasons of Once Upon a Time in the beginning, but it really got drug out and definitely was being influenced by the likes of things like Lost. Whereas The 10th Kingdom is much closer to where they probably should have stayed with Disney things, Cinderella and such, in that it is almost Jim Henson-like, and it is fantastical and silly and just not taking itself too serious. And yeah, we certainly lost that, and even now you mostly lose that. Yeah, I can't think of anything that's just kind of a Labyrinth type movie, other than maybe the remake of Labyrinth, which I'm not sure that actually came out. Yeah. Yeah, and you get really crazy with what they tried to do with Jim Henson stuff in the Muppets. Yeah, and I guess you get a similar experience with like the Muppet reboot movie versus the first Muppet movie, too. You could compare 10th Kingdom to the Portable Door movie that's under advertised. That still shows fairly big changes. Yeah. We just don't have that type of entertainment anymore made where it's, hey, this is for kids, we're not taking this too seriously, this is just a silly fantasy story. And even in that, I would say the 10th Kingdom is still not super kid friendly, in that you have them threatening to put red hot iron shoes on the main female protagonist and saying that that's what they did to the evil queen 200 years ago and made her dance and burnt her feet horribly, torturing her. And you have the female protagonist basically sleeping with a wolf in human form. So most people would say, hey, that's not something they would want in a kid's show either. It definitely echoes an era of family entertainment where there's a little bit for the adults and a little bit for the kids, which, yeah, I don't think really happens nowadays at all. Almost all TV, if you're making anything new TV, is for very old people, or it's cartoons, which are done very poorly. And even the kids mostly don't like the cartoons. Let's see. I started streaming this magical girl anime show that was advertised to me on Amazon Prime, and it is awful. First of all, the dub is way off on the subtitles. They're translating things like Oni-chan into Big Sister in English, which anybody that's watching anime really doesn't need that level of translation. I think the jury is probably out on that, and that you don't need to localize things completely. There's like a point in the dub where the character says, I want to work with someone who has guts, and they just translate it into the dub of balls, which, yeah, you could have easily translated it to guts. And yeah, that's been a long running issue that people have had with dubs, is that the localization teams, particularly the low effort localization that Amazon might do, if this is an Amazon project or exclusive, have become more editorial in that they're just straight up changing the words, when really all we want is good voice acting with a literal translation. Too many cooks in the kitchen type problem, and yeah, everybody wanting to put their own little bit of changes on everything. But it wouldn't really have saved this anime anyways, because yeah, seems like I'm having a little power flickering today. But hopefully my new battery backups will not cause a problem there. Also felt like my internet was having problems. Couldn't get into Memento Mori to start doing the daily stuff. But yeah, the big problem with this magical girl anime show in particular is it's not really a magical girl anime show. They start from the premise that it's magical girls, but they're actually workers at a job, and the magic is actually programmed using computers and created, so it's not a magic system at all. It's a hard science system, which inherently, when you're explaining away magic through a hard science system, you're really undercutting the point of it being magic in the first place. The enemies are not interesting, and the entirety of the focus of the series seems to me to be around the new employee getting praised for actually contributing and being good, whereas in the Japanese world, I imagine new employees are treated like crap. And it is this weird, let's show you a office show, not like the comedy series The Office, but just a show where people are working regular jobs, but their regular jobs happen to be magical girls, who are actually magical women, and they even say that. Yeah, there's some underlying hints there that the commoditization and turning them a bit basically into pop idol type characters, but not even really that, destroys the entertainment value of it. But yeah, it really does. If I was trying to actually pay attention to this series, I would get bored and move on very quickly, because yeah, it's a very different kind of bad anime. Like normally when you get a bad anime these days, it's usually an isekai fantasy thing, and characters will have magic, but it's not a magical girl Sailor Moon type thing. Um, and but usually when you get a bad isekai, it's not that bad. You follow an overpowered, ridiculous protagonist. He fights some ridiculous, overpowered enemies that are interesting. For episode to episode, it can be interesting enough to have it play in the background. But I would say this magical show, which has a really long name, that's why I'm not even trying to pronounce it, can't even get that right. Yeah. And certainly there is a bigger concern, and this has been a growing concern, certainly with streaming services, is that anime made by streaming services or partially funded by streaming services are going to actually be terrible, or just not even really anime, in the sense that it's not really made for a Japanese audience or mostly made by Japanese people, first and foremost. And yeah, there was a little bit of concern of that even decades ago when Ghost Stories got dubbed. Ghost Stories was just a generic, almost Scooby-Doo like kids anime that they determined or decided wouldn't sell, and the dub company got the license to it cheap, and so they just told the voice actors to throw out the script and make up as much ad-lib comedy as possible, which doing that once is funny enough, so I can't say it's not kind of silly to watch a dub, as far as this is an example or a parody of what a dub would look like if they threw the script away and just tried to tell a completely different story with the same animations. But there was a little concern that succeeding encouraged other people to be less faithful to the original script in their dubs, and it didn't happen too much because there was still a large amount of pushback that would have happened had that happened, but it has over the decades probably happened more and more. We increasingly, with streaming though, I think it's way worse as far as dubs being made by people who aren't even caring or in the know as far as the fandom goes. Yeah. And yeah, generally, if I can pay attention and watch subs, I would watch subs, but I'm also realizing that unless I put my glasses on, I can't see the subtitles on my TV. I can't read them anymore, so I am definitely using dubs some more for that reason, and just because I'm not paying that much attention. Yeah, am I watching anything else? I'm watching a lot of TV and not playing a lot of video games other than Oracle of Ages, which is something I can't really make footage of. And then when I do work on the programming, it is only for 10 to 30 minutes before I get somewhat distracted and want to do something else. And yeah, I'm just making slight bits of code improvement where I'm adding 2 or 3 lines and debugging to make sure the 2 or 3 lines actually work. And a lot of times it is just learning something and then taking a break to let that one thing sink in. I don't know if I have any real stumbling blocks right now, but I'm just like not moving very fast in the whole process. I definitely are, and starting to need to make faster progress on it. The big news for me though is I've got to be awake tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, to have my new dryer installed. And I set up that order and then did not think about it at all as far as the idea of I have to actually be awake during normal business hours. And so yeah, I stayed up till about noon today, then I fell asleep till about 5. So anytime between noon and 5 tomorrow, there's a decent chance I will be asleep. There's a high chance I'll just have to drink a 5-hour energy, which has a high chance of me going out of my mind, making me fuzzy-headed at the very least. But yeah, I really don't have anybody else lined up that could just be here to receive the delivery. But yeah, they haven't given me a specific time either. And yeah, there's all kinds of things I'm concerned about there, and that I want it to really be installed correctly and not leak gas, and I need it to vent on the right side. Instead of venting out of the back. Yeah. And yeah, I could certainly run into a lazy installer that just doesn't want to really bring it in the house. They have to, but they may try and claim that the path is blocked or something. Still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. I did want to mention the Tuya Smart app does seem to have now a new integration in that it can get events or keywords from Google Calendars, which is an interesting thing because that means that potentially you could just set a meeting in a room if you're using it in an office on a calendar, and then it might automatically be able to turn on the lights or even an air conditioner to that meeting room. Also means you could give people access to the calendar and add keywords, thus they don't have to install and make an account for the Tuya app. So you could give limited access to specific keywords for specific actions. It definitely opens up some possibilities. I'm gonna see if I can get a calendar with weather prediction as a way of using that, as I am now trying to get my sprinkler back and running just to keep the ground from drying up too much. Yeah, that's an exciting improvement, and it is interesting certainly to see any kind of improvement for smart home devices, because in contrast, like SwitchBot has maybe a dozen items that they sell, and those are the only items as far as smart devices you can get, and they all work on the SwitchBot app. And while the SwitchBot app may push updates to the RoboVacs and such, the actual apps themselves don't seem to ever be updated. Same is true for Google Home. I don't use Google Home that much, or Smart Things. I don't use it that much either, but I seriously doubt there's been any major new features or anything being added to those kinds of more locked in infrastructures. I can say the Wise app hasn't updated with anything. The Ream water heater app hasn't updated with anything in years upon years. That they are very useless apps taking up space on a cell phone to control, in my case, one device each. I imagine Apple HomeKit does get updated fairly often with new features, but probably not that often, because I imagine what HomeKit and any other service that is just trying to implement Matter is doing is updating on quarterly basis at as often at most 4 times a year, where really things should be getting updated / new features 5-6 times a year or more. Still playing Memento Mori. There's a new event here. I actually got 2 special characters all the way up to limited rarity 5, and when those 2 synergized to level 5, it then let me take them up to level 6. So I now realize that if you have the right characters synergizing together, you can get all of your characters up to a limited rarity of 10, maybe not. So increasingly I may have to figure out what characters I'm actually looking for as I'm getting closer and closer to having at least 1 copy of everything. And they're doing their summer event right now, which, yeah, I think it probably reflects that they've realized that in previous years the summer characters stood out as being too weird, and that they tend to be a little bit more provocative, where wearing like swimwear 2-piece bikinis instead of the battle armor that's still somewhat provocative that you usually see in the characters from Memento Mori characters. And yeah, I think they realize since you see these characters year round, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to have special summer skins. But who knows? I could be wrong about that. They may come out with a new character next month that's in a bikini. They don't go that provocative, so yeah. It's just kind of inconsistent overall. I'm working on my news macro to open all of these links that aren't actually sources of links. There's no nothing on this page that opens up any new links. So I basically have made an array of links before and links after what will be the source pages, and it's just going to pull from that array to add links before and after each source page. That way all the news pages, with the exception of that chart, which I'm going to get rid of, still open up in the right order. I am still moving forward with the assumption that the new macro, new Violent Monkey script that replaces the macros will open all the links in a linear fashion. Although I haven't fully given up on the thought of jumping around and working in more of a parallel fashion. That's probably going to be weird, not happen. There's a lot of weirdness with the Violent Monkey scripts in that it's not really loops that I'm doing. Instead, it is a single callback function that is getting a signal emitted to it when other tabs are finished loading. And other tabs, when they load, are just loading the same code but acting slightly differently based on different factors. So instead of a loop to iterate through everything, you are just loading the page or multiple pages over and over again. Yeah, I question if I'm going to get back to Martian Memorandum. That may very well just be another game that I leave on the cutting room floor by the time I actually get back to playing video games for footage. And yeah, I haven't really been doing a great job of scheduling videos either. Tomorrow will be a great day to see if I can get my macros to schedule videos. I still severely question whether I'd be able to schedule videos using Violent Monkey scripts. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, it's very questionable whether that would work or not. This Social Deduction Fest has started. I mentioned that there was a new fest and I didn't see it on the front page. I think that was probably just because it was announced and then there was a couple days before it actually came out. There's increasing questions on the Steam machine's viability. I've seen people sing its praises, but I've also seen people say it still just doesn't really make sense. And it's not even really about the money as much as it's about the potential upgradability of it. Which that's perhaps the biggest sticking point, is how you're going to end up paying more later to potentially try to put more RAM in it or more storage in it, and that's pretty much all you could do. Yeah. I don't think this personal calendar gives you an ICS link. I want to check that. Yeah, without a ICS link to add the calendar to a calendar app or Google Calendars, I don't think you could really do too much more with it. That would be certainly weird though if I had like a smart light or something that came on every time there was a new game coming out. But I could certainly see how like a developer might do something like that, that when your game releases a smart bulb turns on or something. See, is there anything else really going on? Alright, well, my computer monitor just turned off for a second and I can hear the audio, but yeah, I'm having flickering lights, so I need to probably hurry up on this. Let's see if I can remember the Windows Shift there. Yeah, Windows Shift left arrow to move the window back to the left side. When the monitor turns off, everything moves over to the right side. And so I probably need to hurry today, stream-wise. And it does seem like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel audio has dropped out here, but I don't know specifically why. Yeah, the music itself just seems like it's dropped out. Alright, maybe that'll kick back in. But yeah, I need to hurry in today's stream, if that's the case. I still heavily question whether a personalized calendar would ever make sense for me, but I could see it making sense for someone else. But looking at it in its current format of how it's being depicted, I don't think there is a way to get an icy ICS link. Let's see, could you search? (296) active topics. There's a specific forum here. Here we go. ICS would be iCal support. Can we get an iCal export so we can follow personal calendar and other apps? Loving the feature so far. So that's 10 hours ago with no comments. So yeah, that is where that would potentially prove to be useful. Not a lot of people playing this game. That's on sale. It's from December of 2025, which it doesn't look terrible, but it probably does run into that same issue of just not being big enough and being too online focused, or just in general, maybe not even being too online focused, but just not being as standout of a single player game as it should be. This isn't the worst thought, certainly, to get Cluedo, but I'm pretty sure that even this version of Clue and Cluedo has a bunch of DLC on it. And certainly you can see that they have evolved the killers, Mrs. White, Mr. Green, quite a bit, and they really just don't want to promote the old killers. There are definitely some games on the wish list that would be on sale because of this. Yeah, this is the Cluedo Classic, and we're calling it Classic Edition, and still that is not the Clue I remember. That one also had a ton of stuff. Honestly, the thought of social deduction games being its own genre, I think, is less helpful than it might seem, because people who get obsessed with social deduction games are usually people who are playing them in tabletop and board game formats, and it just doesn't tend, I think, to convert over to video game format as well. And I do have this slight thought that a lot of tabletop players are just looking for something very different, and they just aren't gamers first and foremost. Like, I think it is really rare. This Death Note game is down to $5, which might make it worth it at that point. There was nothing wrong with the game, it just wasn't ever really going to be that big. But yeah, the people who are tabletop gamers first and video gamers second are just not the audience that you should be making video games for as your primary audience, because you're not going to pull people away from playing tabletop gaming, as has a lot of ones here with eyes instead of check marks for Steam Deck games. They really shouldn't have had a Steam Deck listing if it was going to be this bad. Or maybe the idea here is that they are just pushing the idea that an information is good enough. And in a lot of these games, I bet the information is just typing in your name at the beginning of the game or something like that with an on-screen keyboard. But yeah, you can see the classic Cluedo has 66% positive in the last 30 days. Overall, 87% positive. But the real issue, so I could like add this double pack for $3.60. But it's $8.49 to get the Ultimate Detectives package, which then unlocks a whole bunch of extra stuff. So you buy this game originally maybe for $5, and then you're being pushed really back up to $15. And there is really a thought, I think, from Hasbro that they don't want to devalue these classic games. And they're just really not that good. Like, it really is just not that much fun to play something like this digitally. Online PvP is going to be pretty much shot for the classic version too, with only 112 people playing today. And Hasbro is definitely changing things quite a bit too, as far as the looks and feels of the characters. Meanwhile, this version is playable on the Steam Deck for $3.50. But then the Ultimate Edition includes some more stuff to bring it up to $30. And you can see that there is just a massive amount of DLC here, with the Sherlock Suspect pack potentially not being included. So yeah, I think it is really the same issue once again, and that these Clue games just don't seem that great. Yeah, and it seems to me like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel's audio is just not gonna kick in. Let's see if maybe we could. There we go. Just had to click on a different screen to get it to start playing again. That little bit of background audio really helps me, and it, I think, just helps the videos in general. At some point in the future I need to opt to have a different kind of background audio, but then I also need to figure out what I would play during breaks, which I definitely had some thoughts about what I was going to play during breaks that don't even make sense now. Yeah, we don't have any Steam Deck refurbs available. Steam Machines still by email only registration. I haven't gotten the email for a Steam Deck. There is a decent chance that by the time I get the email and a predicted year later delivery date, that is just going to be so ridiculously far out that it doesn't make sense to actually order one. Yeah, I could certainly make the argument that the price of a dryer is the exact price I was going to spend on the Steam machine, and so that is out of the picture. there is definitely hopes of things getting cheaper and better for computers. Not a lot of hope, but a little bit of hope. And better, but not cheaper, certainly is on the table in most cases for performance and playing newer games. But then there is also questions there as far as, well, would it really be better or not? Linus Tech Tips showed off a system integrator that did a pre-built of a computer to run SteamOS, and yeah, it ran into some issues, and it's not going to have that level of support and level of focus unless somebody like Dell or HP, one of the major system integrators, makes a Steam Deck type device that just gets really promoted and pushed. I just don't see any pre-builder being able to do anything. I can see even the Walmart brand trying to do that in particular, and maybe the Walmart brand would just work. Certainly there would be a lot of people who would buy a Walmart pre-built computer in Walmart instead of ordering from some unrecognizable name pre-built manufacturer who may be very legitimate and well known, but won't be well known to people who are buying pre-built computers for the first time. Yeah. Let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles, I suppose. From Software's The Dusk Bloods confirms a network test date. Okay. There's some dates here if you're really interested. I don't believe in playing games early, whether that's early access or pre-ordering or testing something that's unfinished. But certainly it seems like people get that news. Whether they even care about that news is questionable. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang reunites with Sega exec who saved the company with a $5 million investment. Sega and the world's richest company celebrated a new partnership in Tokyo. Yeah. Jensen Huang, I believe, is this guy, and he is almost certainly, as the CEO of NVIDIA, a big slowing factor as far as progress towards graphics card development, by just having monopolistic power and pushing AI and only focusing really on AI, and also keeping the price of video cards way more expensive than they really should be. Yeah, I would imagine they are getting a pretty big markup for every NVIDIA graphics chip that is being put on a graphics card, regardless of who is actually manufacturing the graphics card itself. Yeah. This is barely video game related, though, as far as news goes, and Sega themselves, it's not exclusively a video game company. Sega has made animes, they ran arcades in the old days. I'm not sure if they still do. I think they shut them all down. I think they ran exercise gyms. It is pretty typical for Asian companies to be in all kinds of different industries. Sony is in all kinds of different industries, and Sony Interactive Entertainment is just a PlayStation subsidiary. So yeah, one big company investing in another company is fairly common. GTA 6 console-only launch isn't anti-PC, but a case of resource management, an ex-Rockstar producer says. It's much easier to work on a console's limitation than port to PC, says John Riccio. I want to call it Ricardo, but that definitely is not how you would write Ricardo. Riccio, maybe. I think it is really backwards thinking to think that any game is being ported to PC when the reality is the games are made on PC and tested on PC first and then being ported to consoles. It probably it would have been better phrased to say it's easier to support a console in its limited form factors than PCs in its infinite form factors, which that is believable. But what I really think is probably happening here is this is yet another interview that doesn't really matter for anybody to listen to. And also, I suspect that Rockstar is getting a lot of kickbacks to ship on consoles, if not first before PC, just on consoles in general, and so they're more profitable, I suspect, selling their games on consoles than they would be selling their games on Steam. Steam potentially taking a 30% cut. I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox and PlayStation have been negotiated down to as low as like a 22% cut. There is an interesting question as far as, is GTA even an ideal example of a PC game? Because despite the fact that GTA has been very big, it really doesn't have an open modding framework. Like, as far as I know, there's very, very little mods other than the hot coffee mod that get used on any of the previous GTA games. Which, yeah, there is a thought there, certainly, that if it was more of a PC-centric thing, Red Dead Redemption 2 and GTA games would have a very active modding community, adding a lot of interesting stuff. But no, we don't really see that. And honestly, the extremely long delays between GTA releases would certainly benefit if it had a more active modding framework. So we have a new survey claiming that 100% of Japanese online game developers use generative AI tools. I saw another person speculating on this that the AI tag on Steam is probably only being reported inaccurately by so many people. And it does kind of feel like it may very well have been the case that this fight, as far as being anti-AI or anti-generative AI, may have been lost to the 4 years ago as people started to use AI. But also, 100% is a really hard percentage to claim. That seems ridiculous. And certainly, I would say the Japanese games being announced now definitely don't look like they're using generative AI in the stuff that people tend to care about. And certainly, the rules on what you had to disclose on Steam got loosened quite a bit. They really don't care if you vibe code so much on Steam. They just don't want any of the consumable material to be AI generated. And even in that, you have a lot of wiggle room to say, well, maybe the first draft of a character design was AI generated, and then I traced and drew over that. There has been a lot of attempts over the past 3 or 4 decades to move anime into using more CGI, and it almost always gets pushed back as looking worse. And even now, when it starts to look even a little good, it still looks terrible. But they are also losing 2D hand animators, and almost certainly the 2D hand animators are using software that is probably helping them draw things and make in between frames more. So yeah, they have been fairly welcoming to some of that, but there is also a level of you put yourself in your work in Japanese mentality. At least in the past that's been the case, and the idea of just using AI and being lazy really doesn't seem like it is real amongst the Japanese culture that I've seen. So yeah, I think this is probably an exaggeration. I think we'll see a lot of these kinds of claims. This screenshot, if this is AI, then I can't recognize AI at all. And at that point, it kind of doesn't matter, does it? Yeah, if it just becomes unrecognizable. Now, when they say online game market, they might be talking a lot of mobile games. And I wouldn't be surprised if, at least in advertising and the fake ads of mobile games, there is just a lot of AI. And maybe that would put a point in it, as far as you put the numbers up, particularly. This could also be that online game companies were sent a survey from Famitsu and nobody responded to it. They got 1 or 2 people responding to it, and it may very well be that anybody who isn't using AI didn't respond at all, or anybody who's using AI and doesn't want to admit it didn't respond. What they're mentioning here is like Claude Code and GitHub Copilot. That is more vibe coding, or using AI to summarize changes on like GitHub and things like that. And in fairness, I guess every time I search something, I look at the AI results just because it's faster. So I can't really say that I'm not using AI too, because it's getting shoved down my throat in my own coding. But I certainly wouldn't call what I'm doing vibe coding. I'm looking up specific function calls and trying to figure out why specific functions don't work the way I would expect them to work. So I'm actually trying to learn something and do something bespoke and unique and creative from that learning. I also saw, as a side note, that the United States spent millions of dollars to get laptops and computers for kids, and probably not a huge correlation here, but kids these days do seem to be less literate than ever. I don't think that's really a big correlation though, but it was definitely a disaster to get a bunch of Chromebooks and laptops for kids who should probably be reading books, which will last longer and are cheaper. A Google exec, and see, I think this is the new push as far as just forcing AI onto everybody, is the idea of AI is inevitable, AI is already being used, you can't do anything about it, so don't give up on fighting it. A Google exec here saying AI use is widespread, but studios don't always disclose it. Which, there is a big difference also between an employee using AI and not really being authorized to use AI, and an institutional effort from a company to use AI, telling them they have to use AI, which both are happening. This also is being pushed a lot by Tim Sweeney of the Unreal Engine, because the next version of the Unreal Engine is going to have a massive amount of AI integrated into it. Yeah. And the coverage I saw from another YouTube content creator basically comes to the conclusion that if you disclose you have AI and you're a small game creator, you make a small game and you disclose you have AI, it pretty much guarantees you won't get any reviews or people buying your game. But if you're a big game, or you don't disclose you're using AI, you have a lot more success. And it's not really that negligible of a thing. They came to this conclusion, the YouTuber did, by looking at the last fest, and just like looking at what games were in the top 100 from that last fest that had AI when the fest started versus what were in the top 100 as far as sales numbers, or I think it was sales numbers, not reviews, at the end of the fest. And it was basically all but one game was removed, had fallen off of the top 100. And at a certain point, if this is the future where we're going to go, and you're going to see people using 50% of their time being saved by AI usage, that's fine. We can lower the work weeks. We can have a non-reduction in pay, and like the ideal utopian future is that the only people that are working are the people who want to work, and everybody else can just let computers handle it. Almost certainly, when you think about Star Trek The Next Generation, a significant amount of all of the computers and calculations and things were being done by an AI in the ship, and the physical labor and the creative thinking was left to the humans on the ship, which honestly, the actual crew was probably doing mostly maintenance and repair work on the Star Trek ship. Next Generation's Enterprise was designed to be very big to transport people and do diplomatic missions, so it was always designed to be mostly empty as a ship. But it did have schools and holodecks and yoga, a weird martial art thing. And certainly in that Star Trek future, the only AI that really takes over crazy is the Borg as a concept, and the Federation basically rejects the loss of freedom and the loss of individuality that the Borg was threatening. I think we will definitely start to see more people just not disclosing AI and it not really mattering, as long as it doesn't look like AI. Things that look like AI slop are going to get called AI slop. Things that don't use AI are going to be called AI slop a lot too. But if it doesn't look or sound like AI, or read like it was written by AI, then most people are going to not be concerned whether AI was used or not. Moving on, Forza Horizon 6 leaderboards are being wiped as Playground Games patches out exploits. Studio says it's necessary to make sure everyone has a clean sheet. Interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a different reason why the leaderboards are being wiped out, such as there being a expense in maintaining those leaderboards or there being a loss of data on the leaderboards. But it could be that they actually are caring about fairness. The vast majority of games that have leaderboards are full of cheaters, though I don't think I've ever seen a game with a leaderboard that didn't have the top 10 people being obvious cheaters. They'll have millions, if not billions, more points than the 101st person might have, which is just not believable. And honestly, I don't know if you're really making a better game by patching out exploits versus potentially patching your game to let the exploits exist in your game the way you program them, and it just disabling leaderboard access. Because there's still some people, but not that many people, that will go through the effort of installing an exploit on a game just to get to the top of a leaderboard. Most people that are installing exploits on the game just want to succeed and feel like they're succeeding in a game. That's where the idea of having cheats built into your game can be very helpful versus just having a game that's slightly hard in an exploit. Certainly Ocarina of Ages is a great example of that, in that there should be a cheat where you could skip the Goron dancing or a lot of the mini games, or if you fail at the game after a certain amount of time, it just gives you the reward anyways after you pay a certain amount of money, instead of me being able to make a save state and reload a save state every step of the way in the mini games. The baseball mini game is particularly bad in that there's a lot of things that you can hit with the baseball that will give you negative points. So not only do you have to direct it in the right direction, you also have to hit the ball that moves very fast, and there's not a lot of room on the screen to know that it's coming. And if you miss the ball completely and get a strike, you lose 50 points. So yeah, it's very, very hard as a mini game without cheating. Moving on, the next Pokemon Pokopia event has been announced, starring Zorua. I assume that's this Pokemon and not this cube. But yeah, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about Pokopia, and I don't really have any way of seeing numbers, but I would assume that there are still a decent number of people playing it. But it definitely feels like a mobile game, and it definitely highlights where Nintendo might be going, or at least what they're experimenting with, in that they're going to have second-party developers that normally make mobile games make something that is very much like a mobile game, but only plays on the Switch 2, which might slowly corrupt all games, and you might just see a lot of Nintendo games with mobile game elements and aspects to them. I don't think Pokopia has microtransactions though, and that will be certainly a line in the sand if we start to see mobile games on the Switch 2 full of microtransactions and really pushing you to do more of a gotcha microtransaction type gameplay. Moving on, the Dead Space creator, and I guess we have to always give him credit for that, Glenn Schofield, is retiring after 35 years, which in fairness, working anywhere for 35 years, and he's probably been working longer than that, is enough. Certainly people should retire and enjoy the last bits of their lives instead of working up to the point where they can no longer work and are sick and disabled, or dead. That's the nice thing to say. The reality also, though, has to be pointed out that Schofield's final game, The Callisto Protocol, was terrible. It suffered a little bit by them remaking Dead Space 1 and releasing it almost exactly at the same time, and certainly there was some sabotage because of them doing that, but Callisto Protocol in itself was terrible, and he's just not been a good creative aspect or a good management aspect for a while now. Yeah, at least from probably the beginning of the development of the Callisto protocol. Also, I think he isn't even working with the company that made Callisto protocol anymore. This is probably the best thing you could do, certainly, though, is go out, even if you're not really on top, just go out on a failure and not just stay in the industry. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a lot of people who should have left the industry but made it to management positions, and so they aren't likely to be laid off. But we might start to see more of those type of managers leave as the industry shrinks and things go badly. He started in 1991 working on Barbie Game Girl before working at THQ, the original THQ, not the renamed THQ that exists now, on licensed games. And then he got his name attached on Dead Space and Call of Duty, which I think had a lot of people like him a lot more than they probably should have. But yeah, I just don't think he was going to do anything great, particularly as you see here, he's 100% behind the AI, and you really shouldn't be 100% behind anything. Yeah, I don't want to really say good riddance, but I kind of am feeling that. I just don't think he was going to make good games. I don't think he overall has been a positive force in the gaming industry in the past few years. I don't think he's been a hugely negative one, but that's not really ever the case. We don't have an evil emperor in most cases. We just have a lot of middle managers who don't do anything great. With him retiring, that potentially opens up a door that somebody else can be a creator and somebody else can make some new games. Certainly I would say Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol are games that should have been ripped off and hopefully will be ripped off for putting some new twist on it and making it interesting. But we'll just have to wait and see. The idea in Dead Space of having more of your interface visible based on the health bar on your back was an intriguing idea that didn't really get adopted, but it overall did kind of highlight that there was a massive growing number of heads-up display on-screen user interface elements that were being added to games, and you pushed back on that to some level, and we did start to see games have better over on-screen interface things or fewer on-screen interface things after the fact. Let's see, Xbox has removed Tony Hawk 1+2 from its upcoming Game Pass release. It's not clear why the Activision game won't be coming to Game Pass next week as planned. I mean, they own Activision, so if anything, the only thing you can do is assume there is a big announcement about to happen with Activision either really renegotiating how they're going to be a subsidiary of Xbox, or Activision straight up not being part of Xbox at all. Which that would be pretty huge news if Activision breaks off from Xbox and is its own company again. I almost feel like if Activision did that, they may leave Blizzard with Xbox, or Activision Blizzard might even split up in the process. Because yeah, if everything was the same, everything would have stayed the same. The only other thought I could think is maybe Tony Hawk 1+2 really just doesn't play particularly well, and they just feel like it would be embarrassing to release it on Game Pass again. Or maybe this is a case of really just dealing in pennies effectively as far as accounting goes, and that maybe Asha Sharma just saw that it was too expensive to pay royalties to Activision, their own subsidiary, to have Tony Hawk 1+2, and so they removed it. Maybe also that they're moving it around, and maybe it will come next month because they've lost some other game. It could also be that they're trying to train people to expect less on Game Pass, which almost certainly is a thing that's going to start happening, is that we are just going to get less games on Game Pass for the people that do have Game Pass. That's not me, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Game Pass boils down to you get 3 games a month, 1 big game and 2 small games, and it is much more in line with what the Nintendo expansion pass is all about, Nintendo Online. Moving on, Dragon's Dogma 2 performance on Switch 2 is exceeding our expectations, says the producer. Nintendo port often exceeds 30 frames per second, he says. But yeah, it definitely feels like there's been a backslide now where 30 frames per second is back in the conversation as being a valid frame rate. And I mean, I guess maybe if you can consistently get 30 frames per second, it might be good enough for a Switch 2. It might be good enough for most people. The PS4 and Xbox One versions of Dying Light the Beast have been cancelled. Techland says last gen systems simply cannot provide the power needed. I didn't know they were even on the table still. But I imagine this is going to help Techland continue to right their ship and look towards the future instead of looking to the past. But it also goes to show that anybody who's got a PS4 and Xbox One at this point is really going to be on the outs and not supported very well at all. It'd be very hard to make the argument to get a used PS4 or Xbox One right now and get a bunch of used games. The Assassin's Creed Black Flag Racing Studio, Ubisoft Barcelona, strikes to protest 51 staff being laid off. 51 staff is quite a lot. Studio reportedly worked on the underwater exploration sections of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. This is a much better picture compared to last stream's picture of a strike, in that it does seem like everybody has been given a t-shirt, they have been given the same flags, and they had a big sign made. But yeah, that's all goes into the strike budget. They were told to wear sensible shoes, and I think if this is in Barcelona, Spain, it probably was pretty hot, so that's why you're not seeing a ton of pants. But yeah, everybody's wearing shorts, and very few are wearing like socks that are really tall. You can see one person's drinking water there. And I assume they are actually outside the building. Even in the heat wave, the businesses almost never let striking people go into the building. And unions wouldn't really agree to that anyways, because at any point you could be trespassed from the building. And that's just going to cause too much legal fighting. Yeah, losing 51 employees. And even a large video game company is losing a lot of talent. And remember, these are layoffs too. It's not like they found 51 bad employees and fired them. They just picked 51 employees. And probably the youngest, newest employees, if it's a union shop, although very possibly not. That depends on whether the union actually has a contract as far as who gets laid off first or not, which I bet they don't. So more than likely, in this case, I would assume it was 51 of the oldest, most experienced employees who were getting paid the most, which is definitely the argument towards union pay being based off of seniority and how long you've worked there. If there's any real difference in pay at all, there's a real argument that everybody should just be paid the same, and then layoffs won't be based on what people are getting paid. Let's see. Continuing, we have a decent amount of stories today from Video Games Chronicle, and we may run into ones we've already talked about, but I'm not sure. The Xbox studio, that's going to be a mouthful to say, Compulsion Games has invited partners to collaborate with it after going independent. South of Midnight Studio wants to work with other game and entertainment studios, which is a longer way of saying they're looking for work. I do think certainly too this animation style should be rethought and visited by some movie or TV production studio too. Yeah, it might be time with the long string of failures of live action things for Disney to maybe go with the idea of a CGI thing that looks like stop frame animation instead of hand-drawn animation. Although I wouldn't be surprised if actually Disney literally just goes 100% AI and tries to remake old Disney animations using an AI, special AI, to generate something new. New, almost the same, but slightly different. Would be very weird, but not beyond what I expect Disney will do, because Disney really doesn't care about their old stuff. They just want to make money. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they aren't making money with the live action ones, so they've got to do something different to at least stop losing money. It is questionable, certainly, whether we're going to see something closer to Contrast or We Happy Few. It is also worth pointing out that you might be a little bit iffy on working with Compulsion Games in that they have some interesting visuals as a concept, but their total implementation of We Happy Few is kind of problematic, and in that it wasn't what people were expecting and wanted, and people didn't really give South of Midnight a try. But even the people that did give it a try certainly weren't able to sing enough praises of it to get other people to try it. So they may just have too crazy of ideas. Apparently John Hamm, the actor, was originally considered to play Cole Phelps in L.A. Noire. It's kind of pointless to be talking about anything L.A. Noire, since I don't think you could make an L.A. Noire 2, honestly. If you were going to make an L.A. Noire 2, you should have gotten it out before GTA, because L.A. Noire in a lot of ways was doing GTA if it was a noir detective film, and honestly I don't think it really was that noir as far as what you really would expect in a noir film. Role went to the Mad Men co-star Aaron Staton instead. Okay. Eleanor came out in 2011. We are in 2026. As 15 years. There probably has been a bit of a remaster that's been released, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense to remake it, and it would only make a little bit of sense to make a sequel. Probably have to do a loose sequel, something maybe like New York Noir or something with completely different characters. Alright, I'm gonna take a break and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. A couple of things I forgot to mention. According to a Reddit post, 62% of all PlayStation players will not be able to play games if they went all digital. No, 62% of countries won't have access to PlayStation Store on a digital exclusive PlayStation 6 is the post here, which, okay, that may be a bit of an exaggeration and not that different from the situation that already exists here, because I think you could probably name a lot of countries in like Africa in particular that just don't have any kind of online access even now. It is also worth pointing out that Waydroid is back up and running for the newest version of SteamOS for people who want to experiment with running Android on your Steam Deck or any Linux SteamOS build, so that you can play things like Pokemon Champions and maybe a few other games you might be interested in. Waydroid certainly is a one-man effort though, and I think Valve will at some point get around to making it very much just built in a Proton that Android games will play without having to launch a whole virtual machine of Android, which is what's happening right now. The elimination of having to run an entire virtual machine would make things work a lot nicer. Anyways, let's get back to Video Games Chronicle articles before I need to take another bathroom break, which could happen fairly quickly. Dragon's Dogma 2 producer says its Dark Arisen DLC will be more than 25 hours long. Okay, good to know. I haven't played Dragon's Dogma 2, so it doesn't affect me too much. Unfortunately, that's true for most news articles, because most news articles are about games that are relatively recent, and I'm still stuck in playing very old games. Palworld sees a huge surge in concurrent players after its release of version 1.0. Definitely feels like there's a lot of people waiting for that 1.0. It'll be interesting certainly to see if that player base number stays high or if people just get bored and leave, and if there are just a huge amount of reviews now that it is at 1.0 that's holding it to a much higher standard. Let's see, GameWorkers protested outside Mind's Eye Studio Build a Rocket Boy as it had an extravagant playtest for fans. I think this is one of the articles we covered in the last stream where the macro broke, so that may mean the rest of these articles are things we already talked about, which we'll just close these really quickly, and that will help us move on finally to the Gamatsu articles. I basically have already forgotten about the Lego set. Alright, well then that'll bring us to Gamatsu articles now. Duskblood's closed network test set for August 21st through the 23rd. Good to know. Emberville launches in early access on October 27th. Okay. So here's where I need to pull out my keyboard and decide whether this looks like a game I would want to even put on the follow list. Yeah. I honestly don't think I should be that picky. This does have a release date, so I think I should just put it on the follow list and wait until I see some reviews, even if it does look like a game that I might very well not have any interest in. Jurassic World Evolution 2 Complete Edition is coming to the Switch on July 30th. You can see that this is rated very positively on Steam. Once Upon a Katamari is coming to Switch 2 on October 8th alongside the DLC Rolling Live Highlights, which includes 10 new quests, 12 new songs, 6 new cousins, 18 new accessories. Hard Edge Warzone launches July 23rd. It's a 4 vs 4 real-time tactical card battler remake. Must be a remake of a very old game because I don't recognize it. 1998 game. Card battler game. I think I would be hard pressed to really want to play this, but again, I think the move is to put things on the follow list. Because, yeah, I'm getting rid of so many things from the follow list anyways. Although I still think I probably am close to only 2,500 games on the follow list and would like to get it down even more. It doesn't seem to me that the DLC is the same on Steam here, but it may be that we get that other DLC, or it just doesn't really matter that much. It very possibly doesn't matter that much. Farming Camp launches September 24th, which is interesting. Yeah, more and more I'm going to start questioning whether the AI isn't always being used to make the cover art of something, because undoubtedly we're going to go and look and see the cover art looks this way, and then the actual game is going to look slightly different. Although I wouldn't say it looks amazingly different, it definitely is more colorful and sprite based, where this feels more hand drawn. Yeah, and I think you could probably eliminate the AI disclosure if everyone was being honest on the AI disclosure. If Valve specifically said, we don't mind if you use AI for the advertising pictures. But that would also be really bad if Valve did say that, because the inconsistency as far as the advertising versus what the actual game is actually a big problem. And it's equally fair, if not more fair, to start to punish people for having advertising art that is not representative of the actual product you get. Of course, that's always been the case. Like the art on the outside of E.T., the Atari game, looks like the movie. The E.T. game looks nothing like the movie. Let's see. Console Archives Hercules no Iku 2 Titan no Metsubo launches July 16th. Don't recognize this game, but I would assume it was somewhat popular in Japan. Arcade Archives Sylvanian launches July 16th. I may very well mispronounce that. This is just a lot of old Taito games. Let's see, Digimon Up is now available. It's a free-to-play monster-raising RPG. Digimon Up is now available for iOS via the App Store and Android via Google Play. Bandai has announced. It is, I imagine, a gacha game. And I would imagine it's a free-to-start game. Yeah, you definitely have Digimon evoking the first couple of series of the anime. versus this 3D depiction. I should have scrolled down and hit play on the Japanese one too. If it's not a gacha game, it would have to be, then I would guess, a Tamagotchi-like game, or what you would take a modern concept of a Tamagotchi game would go. But yeah, I wouldn't think that they would even bother to make a game like this without having some kind of microtransactions in it. What I think is really funny about this too is that, like, people who liked the latest Digimon Time Stranger game are probably going to feel very differently about Digimon Up if they tried to play it. Like, I just don't think you're going to get the same audience there at all. Moving on, Prinny Sugo Roku reveal has been set for July 16th. This is another game, I assume. Spin-off game from, I think it's NIS? Yeah, Nipponichi Software. Japan One Software, if you translated it. Metafictional turn-based RPG Attack Only has been announced for PC. Okay. We'll put that on the follow list. This does bring about an interesting question: is do I really want to put this on the follow list? Or do I just want to make a YouTube short right now because it doesn't have an actual release date? Or do I even want to make a YouTube short right now and not have a release date instead of waiting? It does certainly open up the possibility of making a YouTube short and just saying it says it's coming out in 2027, then making another YouTube short when I add it to the follow list months later. And that's not too many YouTube shorts in particular, but it is more than one, certainly per game. But yeah, I'm gonna have to develop in my mind what is the best course of actions for those kinds of things. And it is occurring to me, doing these YouTube shorts, I could be potentially grabbing like URLs for games, for game trailers, that I could potentially be putting into the streams when I take a break. I don't think that makes the most amount of sense, and I don't think that's particularly safe. I think it would make a lot more sense to make trailers for games, or look at each of the trailers and make a custom playlist and just update it every now and then, and probably look at the trailers of the most anticipated games, not the most played games or just random new games, because the number of trailers that actually would play, unless I was just going to do a live stream 24/7 of trailers, would be only a couple. Let's see, Tides of Annihilation is going to be playable at Gamescom 2026, according to Komatsu. I just had a horrible thought. Yeah, as someone who just had their Wi-Fi router broken in part by a lightning strike, if my entire computer broke, man, I have some Zoom meetings I have to do that I can't really miss. So that would be a huge problem. Meanwhile, I also haven't gotten a new router set up, and there's every chance in the world that the old router is going to just get worse and break even worse. And, yeah, I just have not been working on that. Yeah, I really have problems motivating myself to do the things that need to be done versus doing the things that I want to do. A lot of times. I don't think I'm unique in that, but certainly it does present a problem. Yeah. Moving on, the Dream of a Cockspur launches July 22nd, which looks like it's a weird game to say the least. And then Castlevania Belmont's Curse for the Switch launches October 15th, which it definitely seems like we are getting to that point where games are being announced for October at the earliest. These do now have release dates, so I will put them on the fall list. Final Boss, the video game, has been announced for PC. It's an adaptation of an Image comic series. It's a hybrid of pixel art, side-scrolling beat-em-up, and 3D fighting games. I don't recognize the comic. Of course, I'm not that big into comics, despite a couple of efforts. Even some of the comics that I am still buying now, I question whether I will actually ever read them, versus I'm just putting them on the shelves to support the creators and own them, as they may get expensive / hard to get. Kinda with comics, reprints are fairly uncommon, so they do get very hard to get pretty quickly. I question the need for a 2D, 3D switch in art styles for a game like this. Campy Castaway launches October 6th. Okay, put that back on the fall list. Some of these games I may very well have removed from the fall list just over the past couple of weeks. Star Bites for Switch 2 is now available. $5 upgrade from the Switch version. You can see that this is mixed reviewed, so I'm going to go ahead and take it off the fall list. Yeah, it's not particularly impressive looking as a game. I'm not super into the idea of an RPG with mechs. Again, here you have a great example of a soft 3D CG look of the characters in game versus just completely different art styles for the banner art. Beast of Reincarnation combat overview trailer is available, which they've really broken it down quite a bit in this trailer. It's probably worth watching this just because this is the question, certainly, as far as can Game Freak make a completely different type of game? Can they make a good game if they're not hamstrung by either short development times or low budgets? I think both in the case of the Pokemon games that they've been in charge of making up until this point. There is also certainly a possibility that this team from Game Freak might be a completely different team. It might be a whole bunch of new hires, or it might be a second-party developer working for / under Game Freak and not getting credit. So if you told me that actually this game was being made by a Chinese company and in secret, as crazy as that might sound, it also seems like that could be believable. It's as believable as the idea that Game Freak has gone from making really bad, clunky Pokemon games to being able to make something that looks like this in such a short amount of time. looking at this combat overview, certainly though it is not particularly translatable as far as the sword slashing. Yeah, I just don't think you'd ever have a sword in a Pokemon game. You could see where maybe the wolf would come in and help, and the wolf could be a Pokemon, but the wolf is really just doing special attacks. Vast majority of this is seemingly you directly controlling the human character with a sword. I'm eating M&Ms right now while watching this. If you can hear that on the microphone, sorry. Yeah, the fact that I got a bunch of melted M&Ms from Amazon delivery has only really encouraged me to eat way too many M&Ms to get rid of them now. Yeah, I just don't know how you could make a active hack and slash type game in the Pokemon universe where the kids don't ever actually fight. I'd have to just assume, if this is just the same Game Freak, that they were really inspired by things like Elden Ring and Ghost of Tsushima, and probably were just super happy to do something different than Pokemon. This doesn't look particularly that fun. It's pretty slow as far as the amount of hacking and slashing you're having to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if this game is actually rather difficult and maybe a little repetitive. I do kind of feel like a lot of games are just losing the power fantasy concept that games tend to have and probably should have, in favor of making games just longer by giving characters too much health or making them take very little damage. Overall, that looked fine. Didn't look amazing though. It certainly didn't look as good as like Nier Automata trailers did, or Stellar Blade combat trailers looked, which that's really more my style. It's just the faster hack and slash with bosses instead of a bunch of grunts, which is what they were really showing there. It looked like it's just fighting a bunch of grunts. Moving on, Fatal Fury City of Wolves, the saga continues trailer teases DLC characters Duck King, Kim Capwan, Rick Stoward, and Leo Corn Gald Demarius, which I would just have to assume that the names are in the order of the pictures there for those characters. And certainly I don't recognize any of those characters, so I'll leave it at that. Now, it probably is at the point now when I finally do get around to doing a wishlist cleanup instead of a follow list cleanup, I should just really consider getting rid of all the fighting games. Although, frankly, leaving several fighting games on the wishlist isn't even that big of a deal. The King is Watching is coming to PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch on July 29th. I have to be careful too. Like the reason I'm doing a follow list cleanup is not just to be organized and just have a nicely organized follow list when I die of old age. It's because there's a limitation on how many things you can have on the follow list before it stops loading. And because I'm making, or at least thinking about making YouTube shorts around it and buying games to make footage around it. But it doesn't really hurt me too much to have a wish list of 10,000 games when I die of old age. And just say, well, here's a curated list of games you might want to buy. This one is rated very positively on Steam. But yeah, I need to be very careful about not starting projects that really don't accomplish anything and really have little point in existing. I do that sometimes. It's just start a project and often don't even get around to finishing it to a level of satisfaction, and then there's just kind of not much of a reason for it to exist. Expedition Samurai launches in early access on August 7th. Alright, we'll leave it at that. And then Aretha Reunion Project crowdfunding campaign has been announced. I don't recognize this game at all. Aretha. Again, it sounds like it's kind of a more Japanese game. But yeah. We will see, I guess, if that's relevant or not in the future, maybe. Mouse PI for hire topped 1 million in sales. 50% sold on consoles, 50% sold on PC. For a boomer shooter, that's probably the sales numbers to expect, and even very likely high numbers for the PC. Of course, that kind of split is going to start changing, I think, pretty quickly here as people think about moving to PC instead of going to the next generation of consoles that aren't going to offer much different than a PC experience. It took a while for Mouse PI for hire to get 1 million sales, but yeah, it has. You can see it's rated very positively. Definitely is on my wish list. This is also remarkably probably the line as far as Steamboat Willie / Mickey Mouse. If Mickey Mouse isn't fully in public domain by this point, it will be in 6 months to a year from now. Although that will only be the elements of Mickey Mouse in the first appearance of Mickey Mouse. It won't be elements of Mickey Mouse added later. But the odds of you getting sued for something that they added to Mickey Mouse later goes down every year. But yeah, this is the line of saying, let's make something inspired by black and white Steamboat Willie mouse characters, but let's not actually have Steamboat Willie in it. Let's not just make it a garbage horror game. Let's make something that's actually good. And definitely, I will say, my journey with this game in its trailers had me thinking that when it was first announced, it was going to be a low effort game based on Steamboat Willie, and as they developed it, they found an ability to make something that was much better than that in a boomer shooter Doom type game, which a lot of other things that just raced to come out based off of things going public domain did not really succeed at doing. Yeah, I didn't see a lot of reviews for this game, but I didn't see a single review that had anything really too negative to say about it. The one thing that people arguably were saying they'd like to see would be an update to go back and replay levels after you beat the game in the final level, and I don't know if an update like that ever came out. Let's see. Okay, yeah. This was July 9th, so just recently they introduced the highly requested level revisit feature plus a range of bug fixes and quality of life improvements. So that was the main complaint I was hearing people complain about, is that once you beat the final level the game was just over, but there was collectibles and things you could have missed, and so being able to revisit a level was kind of necessary. Can you make a sequel to this game? I suppose you could, but I bet they don't. Is this the next Cuphead? No, I don't think so, because it wasn't anywhere as talked about nor as difficult. Is this the next BioShock? No, it didn't have that level of scope and scale. But definitely it looks like a game worth playing, particularly now that we can revisit levels. The deep dive into Kingdom Hearts event has been set for D23 2026. I assume that is Disney 23. I don't know what D23 stands for though. Is that how many subsidiaries Disney now owns? Or yeah, I don't know. I want to go back for a second and point out, yeah, the fact that I have in the back of my head the knowledge that Mouse PI for Hire had that desire for an update, and I knew to look to see if the update had come, is the kind of knowledge that I'm cramming into my brain that should be useful and should be the kind of stuff that a video game journalist slash news reporter slash content creator should have in their head. Not everybody's going to have everything by far, certainly, but I do see far too many people that know absolutely nothing about the games they're talking about. They've looked at one Kotaku article. They're taking everything Kotaku says as perfect, accurate, and complete information. They're talking about games in very general terms. They're making hot takes. Sometimes you do have to make hot takes, certainly, but they just don't delve deep into these games or what other people have said about those games. And I'm not even great about it, so I'm patting myself on my back a little bit here, but the reality is I don't have enough reviewers and news sources that review games, and there's plenty of games that I imagine have similar issues that I am overlooking and not aware of. But yeah, the more informed one can be, the better, is the point I think I'm trying to make. It is interesting in this deep dive into Kingdom Hearts thumbnail, which may have just been Gamatsu's choice to use this, in that they are showing the older animation style of the previous Kingdom Hearts game instead of the new animation style of the Kingdom Hearts game that is supposedly in development. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets canceled. Kingdom Hearts in particular also starts to fall apart when there are no new animated movies being made by Disney. I'm sure there's plenty of old Disney movies they could revisit, but how many Kingdom Hearts games can you make where you're just doing Toy Story 5 and revisiting the Toy Story set, or you're doing Peter Pan or Cinderella once again? Yeah, and even if they were to revisit the live action versions of the Disney movies in the latest Kingdom Hearts, that wouldn't work particularly well. Yeah, Kingdom Hearts does feel like something that is just going to be um, doomed to failure in the future just because Disney has not succeeded in making enough new family-friendly characters or animated movies or whatever for them to use as a source. I in no way am going to claim that Kingdom Hearts stole my idea, but there was, when I was a teenager, many decades ago, a concept for a video game that I had where your main weapon was going to be keys on a retractable keychain. They were going to just be regular keys, not keys turned into swords. And certainly Kingdom Hearts did something much more creative and artistic by turning keys into swords. But yeah, the concept intrigued me for a week or two around the idea of playing something close to like a Zelda game where instead of getting things like the shield and the boomerang and things like that, you would just get a key. The key would act as a key to unlock an area, but it would also go on your keychain, and so the more keys on your keychain, the more damage you could do attacking from like a top down for north, south, east, west directions. Or even possibly you swap out keys and keys do different kinds of effects, but that would have been beyond what games were really doing when I was thinking about the game. Yeah, I had a couple of ideas for games and even tried to learn to draw a couple of them. It didn't really go anywhere though, as far as I was too young, and when I was doing that and thinking about video games, I was probably still 4, maybe 5 years before I could have taken even my first programming class. And even when I started taking my first programming class, it's not like the Godot engine or the Unreal Engine existed, so I was being taught to program in BASIC. And so the kinds of games you could make with the lack of good education on how to program video games in particular was very low. Which that is one possible argument to teach things like Scratch, where things are just a lot easier to program. But you still can't make a good looking video game in Scratch. It makes a lot more sense to just start people in Godot and have them actually make video games. Even if they're going to be small, simplistic, ugly video games. Yeah, most of my programming classes, I got up to like tic-tac-toe and things like that. There's just not a... There just wasn't any supporting libraries that were being taught to do any kinds of graphics. I manually was able to program Pong, and that took me way too long. Programming Pong in Godot should take you a couple days. It took me probably 6 weeks to 6 months to program Pong without anything helping in C++. Yeah. But yeah, the times change, certainly. Times have changed drastically. Yeah. The computer programming C++ I was taught is antiquated and outdated now, and HTML and JavaScript I was taught is mostly useless and antiquated and outdated now. So good thing I kept on learning and moved forward with the times. Then there also were like books. There was a book I got that I never even got around to reading that was supposed to be how to program video games, and yeah, it was really thick and probably way over my head, and probably not that helpful too, because most of those learning books are too old and most of them are not really that good. They're cash grabs. Like, they're kind of like fad diets where if you fail at something, they've set it up so it's your fault, not the fact that the book was educating you poorly. Alright, let's go through the gaming on Linux articles. Linux creator Linus Torvalds has put his foot down on anti-AI comments. This was a news story I saw before. Like, at a certain point, it's kind of confusing as to what he's saying, but he's come out and said that no, we're not, as Linux, going to just be completely anti-large language module and anti-LLMs and AI. There was a proposal here of adopting the Software Freedom Conservancy's guidance on using LLM-backed generative AI systems for free and open source software contributions. And yeah, he said, no, we're not gonna, as long as I'm in charge, basically, we're not going to be so anti-AI that you can't use it. If you want to make a Linux kernel that is at the kernel level anti-AI use, fork it and make your own operating system is exactly what he said. But like, while Linus Torvalds probably isn't super into AI, he's also, I think, pretty into freedom and letting individual maintainers make their own rules and their own governance as far as how AI is going to be implemented or not. There is a possibility that all the other top level maintainers of the Linux kernel disagree with him, and at that point he may have to just concede to the crowd there. But yeah, while there are major problems with AI is also helping in some ways by finding security vulnerabilities that probably have been exploited and known about by governments for a long time, and helping patch those kinds of things. It's almost certainly going to push more towards the use of Rust and other kinds of memory safe programming methods, or safer programming methods. Nothing's going to be 100% safe. And yeah, I do think AI may have a point in that it might be really helpful in documenting changes when you change code, and suggesting comments. It might be very helpful in the human interaction parts more than the programming aspects of code. And yeah, it's not like people are going to start using it. What's going to more than likely happen, if I was to guess, is it's going to be so expensive to use AI that any perceived advantage in AI is going to evaporate, and only people that are working in corporations that can afford the expense of using AI will use AI, and then we will be back to humans just programming things the normal way. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see search engines completely removing their AIs or hiding it, as it just becomes so expensive to run those AI assistant results. Or if there's a lawsuit that happens that makes it not helpful to return an AI result. Moving on, Good Old Games throws shade at Sony with download it and save it forever. This is small, but it says, download the offline installer of any of your games on GOG, save it to a disk, and it's yours forever. Not exactly accurate. You don't need a storefront permission to play what you have bought. Is the second part of that. if you do save something to a disk, there is a chance of the disk being scratched or disk rot or something. Forever is forever. But your lifetime, certainly. 2 people's, 3 people's lifetimes, several generations, very possibly. Particularly on the type of disk there. Everybody that can is getting some pretty easy, cheap pops in that they are being pro discs. Although, in the case of Good Old Games, it's not like Good Old Games puts things on discs and sells things on discs, so they've been online only for this whole time, and their solution actually doesn't work that well if disk drives stop being manufactured and if you don't have a good internet. So yeah, you're really throwing shade while not actually offering a solution to people who have really slow or really bad internet, or can't afford disk space, can't afford a burner or a disk, or I suppose you could put it on a hard drive, but hard drives are really expensive too. Moving on, you're the crew of the world's worst airline and dear passengers, and it looks hilarious. Looks kind of Muppety, but it is more claymation, I guess. Yeah, this doesn't look particularly too interesting to me, and it doesn't have a release date, so I'm just going to close it for now. Here's some new news. It looks like iFixit won't be getting any more Steam Deck LCD spare parts. Valve discontinued the last Steam Deck LCD model in late 2025, and it appears spare parts are going to become rare for it. According to the post on Reddit from Zoc Felswin, they wanted a new Steam Deck LCD battery, but iFix noted it's looking less likely that they're getting them in stock and that they're evaluating other options. In a follow-up official reply in the thread, iFixit said to add clarity, it's not that we are choosing not to stock these anymore. Unfortunately, Valve is just starting to sunset these parts, and we're looking at alternatives. So yeah, it hasn't been really that long, if it's 2026 now, and the Steam Deck was discontinued only a year later. The kit I gave a Steam Deck to was a refurbed LCD model. But yeah, that is more evidence that we'll never see refurbed LCDs again, and that Valve really doesn't want to be a hardware manufacturer. There is not going to be any overlap that I can think of between a Steam Deck OLED and the Steam machine too, so yeah. If they were to get rid of the OLED version, you can pretty much assume that they will, after a year, stop having repair parts for that version too. Although it would be very weird to get rid of the OLED version and just say everybody should get the Steam machine. Suppose if they got the Steam machine as cheap as the OLED version, it might make some sense, but even then, not really. Handheld versus console is a very different thing. And I really am not expecting any major new version of the Steam Deck anytime soon. If there is a new version, it would just probably have different parts that are cheaper to access, but not better parts. It would be interesting, I suppose, if the chip that is in the Steam machine could be squeezed into a Steam Deck, but I don't really expect that to happen. It's too big, too power hungry. It has RAM systems that are different RAM requirements. You would have to just assume that the CPU was the same and a whole different circuit board would have to be generated, which could happen, but it's not very believable. It is also certainly going to be weird if a new Steam Deck comes out and it's somehow more powerful than the Steam machine. does, and if it toggles that way, that would be very strange. One would assume they would come out with a new version of the Steam machine at the same time they came out with a new Steam Deck, which would be probably 2 or 3 years from now at minimum. You can get some fun co-op games with the Squad Goals Humble Bundle. Now this is a case where there should be multiple links opened up now with these games, and it doesn't seem like any of them opened up, so that's interesting. I'll look into that later. Well, that did just happen. It did just work when I took it to a new window. I don't know what happened there as to why it didn't work. The problem with most of these games for me is going to be that they are a co-op focus game. And see, here's one with AI in it. Developer, a custom tool that detects players' voices and mimics them using an AI generated voice exists in this game. So that's not the reason I'm going to take it off the follow list. The reason I'm going to take it off the follow list is because it just doesn't look that interesting to me. Or in this case, it was taken off the wish list. I don't know why Kitchen Wars is even in my library. And see, here's one that doesn't have any single player content. Still nearly 2,000 people playing content warning, and it never even became a big streamer bait game. Although clearly that's what it was. Human Fall Flat. Yeah, I don't know how I got some of these games. Let's see, do I want this on the wish list? I don't think so. Right. So it seems like a lot of these things were just opened, but they were a couple of things to the right. Let's see. Valve has added a Great on Machine section to their Steam machine library, which that is a weird way to phrase that instead of Great on Steam machine. But yeah, so your library potentially is just going to have a whole system there. I should look at that and see what my collection of games looks like compared to the Great on Steam Deck section. Yeah, just to see what big difference there is. Honestly, I don't feel like it's going to be a situation where there's going to be 10-20% more games that just run really well on the Steam machine because the Steam machine is more powerful. I think it'll probably be the same games that run fine on the Steam Deck at a lower visual setting and then run at a medium to even high visual setting on the Steam machine. Let's see. System 76 reveals the Adder Pro laptop. That's a, quote, gamer's dream Linux machine. It's running Pop! OS with Cosmic Desktop, which is controversial to say the least. And I still don't think I could really recommend anybody buying a gaming laptop at all. A Intel CPU with NVIDIA graphics card, mobile graphics cards, that all really screams that this isn't going to be a great experience as far as driver compatibility compare it to an all AMD system. I definitely would say if you're going to get a mobile device of any kind and try and run Linux on it, it should be AMD CPU, AMD GPU at this point. And it almost certainly should not have Pop! OS on it, which I believe Pop! OS is developed by System 76 and probably being pushed very hard because of that. The fanatical launch of the Best of the Killer bundle with some good stuff. Fanatical launches, I guess, the Best of the Killer bundle with some good stuff for cheap. This is a rather long list of games in this case. Yeah, really shouldn't worry too much about whether it's opening more than one link to the Steam games when I'm in the process of trying to replace all this code anyways. Hyperwired is a great twist on arcade shoot 'em up where you have to keep plugging in. Interesting. That's like the Chibi Robo game, somewhat. Which I never went back and played anymore of Chibi Robo. I went from testing out a bunch of GameCube games to just playing games on my Steam Deck, and yeah, I transitioned from the idea of setting it up for other people to play with it to just playing with it myself, which is, I suppose, fine. Yeah, I'm not sure I have enough mental energy to make too many more decisions, so I'm just going to close that and leave that on the fall list for now. Let's see. A GoldenEye and Perfect Dark inspired shooter, Agent 46 Spies Never Dies, launches August 11th. Again, another example of the cover art not really matching the 3D models in any way. So I've never played any of the Perfect Dark games, and so I would just say this definitely looks like GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, but I do certainly have to question, is that a good thing? Yeah, you could easily make games play like GoldenEye 64 and make the graphics a lot more pretty nowadays. And I think this is very possibly one of these games where they had some assets that looked low polygon and decided to just use those assets instead of making a game look as good as it should. This cover art here is way more interesting than anything I just saw in the actual gameplay. And the name certainly evokes low effort in that you're just calling it Agent 64. But I'll put it on the fall list and see if I'm proven wrong. You can get a bundle of 12 narrative games for $10 for the Humble Bundle. Yeah, it's questionable how many narrative games I want to play. Gone Home I think was great, but it's probably the only of those types of games worth playing that I've seen so far, and a lot of these others just get very close to visual novel levels of lack of interactivity. Apparently, if you love Resident Evil, keep an eye on Pulse Breaker, the original Resident Evil. Yeah, there's far too much of this going on, where they are just low polygonal in their art style because of probably it just being cheap and easy to do, instead of evoking the gameplay style or the thoughts of what a Resident Evil game was. Even the creators of Resident Evil have at this point admitted that the remakes of Resident Evil 2 needed to be a modern game and look visually modern. This was from 2021. But yeah, I guess in this case I'm just gonna make a YouTube short on it. But yeah, I don't think any game could really convince me that the low polygon PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 art style, probably closer to PlayStation 2 art style, is an art style that people should make games on nowadays. There are just a big difference between being nostalgic for something that was done artistically and being nostalgic for something that was severely limited based on the graphics card possibilities at the time. I definitely feel like there's an alternate universe out there where instead of embracing 3D in PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era, we just embraced really pretty 2D and stuck with 2D for a much longer time before 3D even got experimented with. Which even now, most games cannot make a hyper-realistic 3D game look good. Moving on, you face the cold and various horrors in the spooky looking After Hell Freezes Over game. Which is not White Shadows. It's this game. Okay. That might be something. Here's Gone Home. Rated mostly positive. Honestly, it's not even rated that positive. I think my experience of Gone Home, of just assuming that there was going to be something there and the game really playing into that and making me assume that some monster was going to show up or something, gave me a very different experience for Gone Home than what other people might have. I could easily see people just saying it's boring or that it's pointless. Moving on, Abysmal Merge is a multitasking fishing bullet hell game. That's a lot of different genres being mixed together. Here you can see Neo Cab is mixed in the last 30 days, and it might be to do with something being edited out or censored, if I recall correctly. No, it doesn't seem like that's why it happened. Yeah. Seems like the game is just perhaps not that good. That's just it. Here's that game Final Boss. And yeah, look here, you have these 2D art styles which look perfectly fine. So why throw in the 3D CGI art style? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Why have that kind of fighting and you can also have this kind of fighting? And honestly, if you're going to change art styles, that probably needs to be the gimmick of the whole game, and that every single boss fight would have to be in a completely different art style, would be my guess as to how things were really going to go. Here's another question as far as if it says November 2026, is that good enough to put it on the fall list, or do I need an exact day? I think basically I need an exact day. This one, Stillness of the Wind, it's mostly negative in the last 30 days. but mostly positive overall. And overall, just doesn't look that interesting. Let's see. Heavy Metal Death Can is a retro survival horror set in a Cold War era submarine, now on Linux. Okay. All these things are all over the place. And in this case, I guess I could either put it on the fall list or just immediately put it on the wish list. I'm just going to immediately push it on the wish list. No longer home is mixed. So yeah, you can definitely see how some of these bundles give you some games you might want to play and a lot of games you definitely don't want to play. Alright, well, I just dropped my mouse. It slid off of my leg. And I was just about to take a break anyway, so I'm going to pause the recording here in a second and take a break. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yep. It looks like the potential of the Steam machine having the red line of death, equivalent to the red ring of death, seems to be happening more often. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the first round of Steam machines do occasionally have problems. One of the interesting things I saw on the teardown for the Steam machine is that it does seem like the entirety of the motherboard is supplied just one type of voltage through the power adapter that is just touching two metal pins basically in the built-in power adapter, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because that really would imply either they have a very custom board that's only running on, I would assume, 5 volts, and then they're having to step down everything to anything that would require anything else, would be the other thought, and making the motherboard itself act as a power adapter, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I imagine the power adapter is not really the issue there. I imagine there's just a lack of quality that's going to be with any new device, particularly as people are rushing to manufacture things faster and cheaper. And that is the big thing with particularly like Tuya smart devices too, is that there's a whole bunch of products that can be made well, or it could be made really cheaply with bad capacitors, and you just never really know. And that's only if the actual circuit design is good to begin with, which it may very well not be. A lot of devices are designed to fail right after a year or two. They're not designed to last a reasonable amount of time. Of course, the Steam machine seems to be failing on day one. Of course, it could be a lot of people also lying / doing something weird with the Steam machine. Could be a lot of firmware things are not up to snuff, or a lot of the operating system still has bugs. Anyways, let's continue through the Gaming on Linux articles. I really need to wrap up today's stream and try and go to sleep. I doubt it will happen, but yeah, even if I was to go to sleep now, staying asleep for 8 hours instead of sleeping for 4 hours is kind of unlikely. I don't know really how to make that happen either. Total War Warhammer 40k looks explosive in new footage, according to Gaming on Linux. I'll leave it at that. I question whether I would get into Total War Warhammer 40k. This one just says to be announced, so yeah. That is one I'm not going to put on the follow list. Though that does make me wonder as far as do I have the follow list cleanup program correctly to show me games that say to be announced? I think I do. Seems like we've been looking at those games. That is a possibility too, is I might go all the way through the follow list cleanup and still have a 2,000 games, because there's just like 2,000 extra games that are being ignored because of bad programming and auto-closed. Moving on, people don't really care about my programming. I wish I had somebody I could talk about with programming on a hardcore level, but the only person that would really understand it would be somebody also working on the same code. And even then, I've run into situations where the programmers working on the same code actually can't speak on the same level. Moving on, Shipopolis is a cozy Anno-inspired city builder with a demo live. think we already made a YouTube short on that one. Let's see. Doom and the Dark Ages and Digimon Story Time Strangers have de novo removed from them. I think we may have already talked about that. Yeah, I think we may very well have a situation here where we're going through articles we've already talked about, so I'm just going to close a few of these. And that'll bring us to GameDeveloper.com. Let's see, the UK Union launches a free resource to decode video game writing contracts. The Writers Guild of Great Britain has said that it's witnessed an increase in poor practices around writing contracts in recent years. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a big point here as far as whether you actually are a freelancer or whether you're an employee. If you're an employee, you work on any projects as designated by their employer. If you're a freelancer, you engage on specific projects for a limited amount of time that you agree upon. If you're a freelancer, you set your own hours. Freelancer, you're self-employed, work on a contract by contract basis. You set your own rates per project. You will automatically have the copyright and licenses assigned/assigns of this copyright via contract. So you might sign away the copyright in a freelancer situation. You can work under multiple contracts at any given time with multiple employers usually. But here's the big thing, like, while all of that sounds great to have as a freelancer, you are not entitled to most rights and protection under UK employment law. Same is true in the United States. Some health and safety things and discrimination things, you do have some of that protection, but you certainly would have to sue to maintain those rights. And that's why a lot of employees are tricked and told that they're freelancers or are called freelancers in the accounting books so that they don't have protections, but then they are actually being treated like employees in that they are not able to set their own working hours or take multiple contracts or decide what things they're going to work on or not. And not usually entitled to statutory employment payments if you're a freelancer. I'm not sure what statutory payments are. Include, I guess that's probably more of a UK thing. But yeah, you don't get health benefits or anything like that or overtime as a freelancer. The other thing they often do is they'll make employees not freelancers, but extremely low quote-unquote managers who aren't actually managing anybody. That way you're under a contract that allows them to not pay you overtime. A lot of times they'll do that in the United States. So yeah, that's not a terrible little chart. It's not really giving you a ton of detail and information. Yeah, it's not a terrible little chart for anybody, writers or anyone else. Moving on, the IWGB, Game Workers Union has formed a redundancy task force to defend workers' rights. With training, solidarity, and supports, workers can stand up to bosses who use redundancy to cover for their own mismanagement and greed, which almost certainly is happening way too much. What is IWGB? I think that GB might be Great Britain. Interactive workers. Like This is one of those examples where the proper form in writing any article is to write out something the first time, then use the initials. Instead of potentially making me zoom in on a picture to see its Independent Workers Union. So I'd have to assume that's Independent Workers Great Britain. Which that is going to be slightly weaker of a union, I would guess, in that it is not trying to unionize an entire group of people at an entire company, and instead is trying to unionize the indie workers. But in the end, I imagine unions will just merge, and there will be probably this need to have an indie workers union that supports all game developers, because almost all game developers are going to become independent contractors / freelancers. Moving on, quote, the entire thing is going to fall apart, end quote, inside the latest round of mass layoffs at Xbox. So who said this quote is really the only actual news. Maybe somebody from IdTech, maybe somebody who worked at IdTech at one point. Yeah. I do have probably too much optimism, and it's not even that much, that these layoffs are just necessary evils to right this ship that has been sinking for a long time. But yeah, it's also very possible that it just all falls apart. We might be witnessing real time the fall and death of Xbox. We've seen other game companies mishandle and make mistakes and go from being top of the class to not existing. Certainly Sega kind of ran into that problem, and certainly a lot of other companies like Philips CDI tried to enter the game market and failed miserably. At some point I even believe Nintendo might fail miserably, but yeah. On the other hand, Xbox is bloated, and it needed to lay off managers, in my opinion, not associate level employees. And particularly laying off people at IdTech isn't the craziest thought, because that's not the engine they're going to go forward with. But yeah, it certainly sucks to see people lose their jobs and get laid off. But for the game industry in general, it may not be the worst thing. It might very well free a lot of people to form their own companies and make their own games, make different kinds of games. Had nothing changed a couple years ago, had Asha Sharma not come into power, had Xbox just decided to continue doing what it was doing, it was pretty obvious that it was just going to do the same thing it had been doing, making the big tentpole AAA games over and over again, despite potentially people not even really wanting them, and then occasionally maybe doing something weird and having that fail, and then kicking that company to the curb. It definitely doesn't feel like, had Xbox done nothing, Xbox would be in a better position in the future. So it is, a lot of times it feels like it's just better to do anything, even if that thing you do is wrong, than to stay with something that isn't working. You know, this is basically a very messy divorce that we're seeing between companies that were acquired by Xbox and what Xbox really wants to be. Moving on, Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced crosses 2 million in sales as the studio strikes over proposed layoffs, which is another terrible example of how gamers and your just mainstream gamers don't really care about layoffs and probably don't even really know about layoffs. And what can we do? Doesn't make any sense to really try and shame gamers who just want a little bit of entertainment in their life for buying Assassin's Creed Black Flag and not knowing about Ubisoft's problems and not boycotting Ubisoft because of it. And does that really help anything at all? If we are going to start shaming people for not being 100% good citizens to the gaming community, we will probably never stop shaming people at that point. Most people don't have any shame in the first place. But yeah, these boycotts weren't, in this case, there wasn't really a big organized boycott in the first place, and maybe they need to say nobody purchased the game for the first 2 weeks. It just would have been a very good game to say, hey, just don't buy the game for the first 2 weeks. That's easy enough. It doesn't have multiplayer in it as far as I know. But yeah, make it pretty obvious that you have the power and are willing to forego pre-ordering and buying things. Let's see. Moving on, Paramount confirms Mike Zaymont is employed by Avatar Legends dev. Zaymont holds a position as an individual developer at Gameplay Group International. He was previously accused of sexual harassment during his time as CEO of Lab Zero Games. I have to assume if they are putting in the headline he was previously accused, they never proved anything, so that arguably to me means that should not be brought up and that this is just an attempt at cancel culture staying around here. I don't recall this story at all, and so I really can't form any kind of opinion there. But yeah, there are still people who bring up Gamergate, and every time Gamergate gets brought up, it is described as something worse and something different from what I thought it was. And I can't help but feel like I'm just getting gaslit at some level. But I mean, anybody who's bringing up Gamergate probably over 10 years after it happened is got some kind of agenda at this point. It's just like a pointless thing to even bring up and mention. If you want to talk about brigading and show a more recent example of people brigading or downvoting a game or review bombing a game that seems illegitimate to me. If you want to talk about a lack of ethics in journalism, show me more recent examples. I'm sure there's plenty of lack of ethics in video games journalism. And honestly, you don't even really need to talk about lack of ethics in games journalism, just bad games journalism exist. But yeah, these kind of things either have to be proven in court for me to care about them, or just leave the people alone and don't bring it up. GameDeveloper.com is kind of bad on that aspect in particular, about holding grudges and bringing things up that are irrelevant to the story. These are the two games that got the de novo DRM removed. Compulsion Games posts call for business partners after an Xbox spinoff. That probably, if I was to guess, means they are desperate for work and need a job that will pay them for like next week's payroll. Spin Master lays off the Paw Patrol, the game devs, 2 days after launch. Spin Master says the Toronto-based Sago Mini team will take over the original Inc.'s developer duties, or Originator Inc.'s development duties. See, and this is one of those examples of where this might have been big news if this wasn't so industry standard. And you know, it just kind of happens too. You know, you work with somebody, it starts off good. Throughout the process, you realize it's not going to work out in the long term. You wait for the job to get done, and then you complete the job, and you, in the case of a developer/publisher relationship, you break up. A lot of times when the publisher breaks up with a company, they don't have any income to pay their workers, and the developer then lays off people. Maybe it's not a publisher relationship at all. Maybe the developer just feels these employees are not necessary or not doing a great job. Like Paw Patrol games, I will say specifically, don't seem like they're that popular. So, and I could see that they may have started developing a Paw Patrol licensed game years ago where it might have made more sense, and now it totally doesn't make sense. It doesn't usually make sense to make a licensed mobile game or game in the first place. The Alters and Frostpunk developer 11-Bit Studios is laying off 20 employees. Studio says it's managed to mitigate the numbers of job cuts by transferring employees to internal teams, which really that implies that these are not being laid off. These are people literally being handpicked to be fired, which I don't know if that really matters in most places in the world, whether you're fired versus being laid off, unless you're fired for cause. And even then, if you're fired for cause, you usually still qualify for unemployment. But there are certain things you can be fired for cause, such as not showing up, or maybe gross insubordination or something like that. It is, I think, worth bringing up, and it's kind of interesting that it's not even mentioned here, that The Alters is one of those games that had AI in it, didn't disclose it, and got caught. And it was a big enough game where people kind of forgot about it and kind of didn't care. So even now, I think The Alters may be on my wish list or follow list, and yeah, that AI usage or that attitude may very well have directly led to 20 employees being laid off. Alright, let's look at all the new games on Steam. The way this goes now is slightly different in that if I'm swiping down, I'm closing the tab. I still haven't really set up a key or hotkey to close the tab. I didn't think about that recently. Otherwise, if I keep your eyes here, and if that changes, I'm putting something on the follow list. Or if I'm not going to put something on the follow list, I might put something, just make a YouTube short on it. I think, generally speaking, when I see all new games on Steam, I'm probably not going to pay a lot of attention to a release date. So it is going to potentially be a situation where more games will be added to the follow list that don't have release dates. And yeah, if I wasn't doing the follow list cleanup off screen, I still need to do 20 or 40 old games just to decide whether or not they should stay on the follow list or not. Yeah. do have a slight temptation to do that off screen, particularly after these streams now, because I'm not having to run the macros to make YouTube Shorts anymore. I'm just doing it automatically as I go, and I'm not having to close tabs because I'm closing the tabs as I go. I do have a lot of more downtime now after a stream, but I don't know too much that I can really do there, because after streaming for 3 hours, which seems to be about the length and breadth of how long these streams are going to go, I definitely am going to be in too much pain and too tired to do anything manually. There's another Cthulhu game that's already on the fault list but not being reviewed particularly well. Here we have yet another adult game that should be in the adult section, I imagine. Let's see. I suppose if I see something and I make a YouTube short on it and don't put it on the fault list, there's a decent chance I'll just never see it again. It does feel like it's worth running that risk, just so I'm not putting things on the fault list just to immediately remove them from the fault list later. Or not immediately remove them, but remove them later. Night Librarian. Looks like it could be something. More of a text puzzle game, I would guess. This is one of those games where it looks weird, but not quite weird enough to convince me that there's something there. Got a Ninja Turtles game, Splintered Fate. I don't know why this is open now. However, see if there's an update. TLC character was added March 26th. So yeah, I have no idea why this is opened up at this point. Yeah. We're seeing more and more of these taskbar programs. I don't know if it really gets you anything though to run a taskbar program and have it look like a lot more people are playing your game than really are. Although I guess mobile games kind of have that advantage in that pretty much any mobile game could be running in the background and give you a notification when it's time to do your dailies. Definitely seems like that's the case with mobile, but that hasn't really helped mobile. This is an interesting thing, is you have a character looking like they're covered in paint. But yeah, there might be something oddly lewd about that. Certainly too. The game doesn't seem to be lewd. But yeah, there's maybe we'll start to see more of that happen. I doubt it, but it could happen. This is the kind of game I don't want to see, where somebody's making a visual novel and just taking photos of themselves. Feels too theater kids, feels like it's not going to be enough of a game. I'm being perhaps a little cruel and pickier than usual, which is probably a good thing. Yeah, there's no AI we saw because the AI auto closes. It's crazy that there's still a Battlestar Galactica game that exists. Some of these games probably just came out. And this is another news source that I'm just going to get rid of because the faultless cleanup idea does not really work around the news updates, and I don't want to read the news updates. Just leave it at that. One of the things I guess you could compare Stargate Universe to is here you have several different people that seem to be pretty prominent, whereas in Stargate Universe there's basically 3 really important characters and then another 4 or 5 secondary characters, and then there is just a ton of people who completely disappear throughout the majority of the series. Just civilians that don't seem like they are doing anything for the entire run of the TV show. No. Yeah, I guess I don't really have anything more to say there. Even though we went slightly over 3 hours, it's not that far over 3 hours, so I'm still kind of happy about the time we're spending now. There's almost certainly room for improvement, but I don't know exactly where that's going to come from. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching.